So it's been over a month since Fire Emblem Engage has finally come out, and even though it wasn't supposed to take me this long, I finally have been able to make my review of Engage. So if you've seen any of my previous Fire Emblem reviews, you already know what to expect from this video. And just in case you either forgot since it's been like 5 months since my last review, or you're new here and haven't watched any of those videos yet, in this particular video, as the title states, I'm going to be reviewing Fire Emblem Engage in its entirety, going through the story in a semi-detailed manner, but also being as brief as I can possibly manage in the retelling of the story. And while doing so, I'll be voicing my opinions on the story, obviously, characters, battles, all of that jazz. And just in case you clicked on this 30+ minute video hoping for a spoiler-free review, I got you covered. So here's the spoiler-free part. If you're wanting to play Fire Emblem Engage as either your first Fire Emblem game entirely, or even if you're a relatively new Fire Emblem fan who has only really played either Three Houses or Three Hopes, and this statement is aimed at you specifically if you're a huge fan of Three Houses or Three Hopes, please don't go into this game expecting a story that takes itself seriously, let alone characters that take themselves seriously, because I can promise you they don't at all. Because, I mean, there's an absolute wreck of a girl boss, a funnier version of Claude from Three Houses, and there's even a character that's a priest who loves to party, teaches old men how to twerk, and howls like a wolf at literally any chance that he can get. Like, this game is clearly not taking itself or its characters seriously whatsoever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this game is bad, not by a long shot. Though the story is pretty basic, this game is honestly one of the funniest and most enjoyable games that I have played in years. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the clips online of some character interactions, and if you have, it should come at no surprise to you when I say that Fire Emblem Engage has made me laugh more than anything I've played since Borderlands 2 and the Portal series. But if ridiculous characters and non-convoluted stories isn't really something that sounds like it's for you, then maybe this might? The gameplay for Engage is definitely top tier. Now, I'm not a channel that goes too heavy into gameplay aspects because I'm not like a super tryhard at all, but this game, as far as difficulty goes, is pretty hard at times. I mean, I played on normal, but you know, maddening is an option if that's what you're looking for. And in my opinion, its combat is a lot of fun, which is enough for me. Not to mention, in the graphics department, the pre-rendered cutscenes are absolutely stunning. The performance quality of this game is top tier. I mean, it's not like Pokemon. There's barely any screen tearing or performance issues that I've noticed, and all of that combined with the voice actors clearly having the time of their lives voicing these characters and having some of the greatest deliveries that I have ever heard in some cases, all of that with this game somewhat being a love letter / homage to all of the previous Fire Emblem games that have come before it, it's honestly all the reason I need for me to adore this game as much as I do. Though no amount of praise will overlook some of the shortcomings that I can't exactly talk about in the spoiler-free section, the one thing that I can talk about is the song that plays during the opening of this game, which is just yikes. The lyrics of the song is a nice reference to all of the emblems. If you read the lyrics, it's actually pretty cool, but it doesn't change the fact that the song is definitely a choice to say the least. But that's all I can really say without getting too deep into the spoilers, so as for my full semi-in-depth review, just before I start that, I do want to preface all of this by saying that this video is entirely just my opinion. If your opinion differs at all, please feel free to let me know in the comments, but just remember, nothing I say is an objective fact unless I explicitly say that it is. So, without further ado, let's jump into the spoiler-filled review. And to get started, we have to talk about the prologue. So, after choosing which form of Valir you want to play as, we are thrown into a tutorial section of the game that kicks off with this absolutely stunning cinematic that we've seen a million times before thanks to the trailers. And after running through a hallway filled to the brim with enemies and allies alike, Valir, accompanied by a blue-haired emblem that we definitely do not know the name of, has a one-on-one battle, well, two-on-one battle with an individual who definitely isn't the big bad of this game. But once Valir defeats the that weird snake-looking man, they suddenly wake up to notice apparently the entire tutorial sequence was just a dream. And after awaking from said dream, the first thing Alir comes face to face with is blonde-haired Deku and his twin sister Fram, who, after a brief instance of fangirling, go and grab a knight named Vander when they finally realize that Alir is actually awake. And after telling Alir that they have slept for literally 1,000 years, Vander also does us the favor of giving a little rundown by reminding Alir that they are a divine dragon or a member of a royal family of dragons that are revered to these people as gods. And Vander also explains that their mother is the queen of the holy land of Lythos, and also hints that the individual from earlier that we saw in this dream may have been a creature called the Fell Dragon. Once he gives us all of this exposition, Vander then decides to bring Alir home to their mother in hopes of jogging their memory a little bit, because Alir doesn't seem to remember anything that's going on. And while heading to the castle, it seems that this entire time Alir has been sleeping on a floating island called the Somniel, where Vander, the twins, and countless others before them have been taking care of Alir for the millennia that they slept. And while everyone is getting acquainted with the newly awoken Alir, suddenly they are all ambushed by a group of weird-looking humanoid creatures, which prompts probably one of the best memes to come from this game.
Shall we fight them? As you wish, Divine One. You whose bravery knows no equal.
No, let's run.
With Alir oozing of Joseph Joestar energy, choosing to run instead of staying and fighting these creatures. While attempting to honor Alir's wishes of turning tail and running, the twins promised to attempt to hold off the creatures so Alir and Vander could get away. Only for Alir and Vander to have to save them instead because, well, they're kids. And while saving the poor children, Alir ends up remembering they are wearing a ring which happens to be the same Pokeball ring Marth is held hostage in, or is possessing. I'm not really sure what the proper term is for these rings, to be honest. Either way, Marth introduces himself as the one and only iconic Marth Fire Emblem, before he turns around to help Alir save the kids from being slaughtered. Well, momentarily. Because immediately after saving the twins, the group gets mobbed yet again, but this time by a bigger group, only to this time be saved by... oh god, it's Rhea. Oh no, sorry. Just Alir's mother. Now, after reuniting with Queen Lumera, she explains, while flying all of them to the castle, that apparently the Fell Dragon's name is Sombron, and though he was defeated by Alir 1,000 years ago, he has returned, and with him he commands an army of corrupted. She then explains that the creatures that Alir fought earlier are corpses that are revived by Sombron's evil power, which, god damn, does that make it feel so weird. I mean, I understand why Alir would feel weird about fighting corpses, because, you know, it's kind of sad because they're dead. It doesn't matter. She also shows Alir to a sacred room in the Lythos castle that holds 5 additional emblem rings, and she explains to Alir that there are 12 rings in total, all across Elyos. She also adds that 6 other rings are entrusted to the nations that surround Lythos. These nations are Firene, Brodian, Solm, and Elusia, and because they are basically the Infinity Stones, whoever wields all 12 rings is given world-altering power, but this power can only be granted once every 1,000 years, which, you guessed it, is coming up soon. And traditionally, every 1,000 years, the Divine Dragon must make their way across all of the nations to retrieve all of the rings for a ritual to keep the peace in Elyos. And while making preparations for this journey, Lumera has Alir, Vander, and the twins spar with her to teach you and I a little bit more about the mechanics of this game, and also to try and jog Alir's memory once again. During this battle, we are shown firsthand that Emblem Sigurd is actually pretty dope, and after the battle, we are literally shown a conversation that kind of alludes to Sigurd possibly cheating on his wife with Lumera, which is just wow. Alir eventually heads to bed, where they have a nightmare of sorts about a version of themselves with all red hair, which, given this nightmare and the gift that Lumera gave us earlier that was split into the same 2 colors as Alir's hair, maybe this leads to there possibly being a morality system in the game. I'm not really that sold on it, and this is just early speculation, and honestly, between you and I could have just cut this from the script later if it wasn't true, which, spoiler alert, it's not, but I don't feel like it. Anyway, after talking to a blue-haired ghost about their dream for a little bit, like a totally sane individual, the ground suddenly begins to shake, and Alir goes searching for the cause of the noise, only to find the twins and Vander all geared up for a battle against a small army. And during the fight, while Alir is trying to make their way to their mother and the ring vault, 3 brand new faces suddenly join the battle. A blonde-haired boy who turns out to be Prince Alfred of Firene, and his 2 retainers, Etier and Boucheron. When they finally reach the chamber, Alir encounters a mysterious cloaked individual who decided they are simply too evil to walk on the ground like a normal person. And this mysterious girl uses a extremely powerful spell to try to kill Alir. Queen Lumera jumps in the way to save her child, as any mother would probably do, and the attack ends up claiming Queen Lumera's life instead. Once this mysterious girl steals the rings and disappears, there is a very drawn out and equally kind of sad scene and a funeral for the queen. And once all of that is said and done, Prince Alfred reveals why he had come to Lythos in the first place. And that is because his kingdom is also under attack by these corrupted creatures, and he has come to ask the queen for help. Now, obviously, since Alir needs to go to Firene anyways for these rings, they agree to help Prince Alfred. But before returning to the prince's home, Vander thinks that Alir should utilize the Somniel as a safe haven for various reasons outside of just us having a social hub. One of them being that it is quite literally the only place in Elios that cannot be accessed by the Fell Dragon and his forces. And I mean, how convenient is that? While relaxing on the Somniel momentarily, I gotta say, it's really nice and a huge upgrade from the monastery in 3 houses, if we're being honest. I mean, it's gorgeous. There's a garden, a pool, a farmyard for animals, and after you play through the game some more, you eventually unlock a variety of different areas, such as an arena, this dog thing that literally shits out material called ring fragments, and obviously there's also a place to keep all of these all-important infinity stones. And on top of that, there's even something called a Tower of Trials, which is super interesting. I mean, you can use it to grind out resources to upgrade the emblem's weapons, and there's also even a PvP sort of thing that you can access in this tower, as well as a boutique so you can get some drip for your characters, fortune telling that literally serves no purpose as far as I could tell, a gym that you could use to temporarily boost some stats for one fight, and of course there's some minigames. So, after becoming acquainted with the Somniel, to pass the time, Prince Alfred tells Alir a bit about the political situation surrounding the kingdom of Firene, with them forging a non-aggression pact with Brodian to the north and Solm to the south, who are obviously their neighboring countries. Alfred also explains that the pact with Brodian was not exactly easy to achieve because Brodian is constantly looking to expand their territory and is doing so while they are currently at war with the 4th nation of Elusia. Now, upon reaching a village that is near the capital of Firene, Alfred suddenly becomes worried as this specific village is a little too quiet for his liking, and soon after entering this village, not only do we see a handful of corrupted attacking the citizens of this village, but we also see Alfred's sister, Celine, who is accompanied by her retainers, Chloe, and Luis. This is the only time that I'm going to pronounce any of those names correctly. As Alfred begins to question what Celine is doing, she shuts him up by telling her brother that an army from Elusia is attacking the castle, and she went to go warn him. And just between you and I, Alfred did say earlier that unlike the rest of the nations in this game, the people of Elusia worship the Fell Dragon, so maybe this is all just one big coincidence, maybe. But personally, I think it may not be connected at all. I mean, where's the proof? Why would Elusia side with the Fell Dragon? There's absolutely no motive. You know what I mean? Sarcasm aside, once the battle is finished, we find Alir enjoying the beautiful scenery of the village, and Alir is almost ambushed by one single corrupted before being saved by a little girl named Vale. And as Alir approaches Vale in an attempt to thank her, they get distracted for quite literally 2.5 seconds, and suddenly, when they turn back, Vale is gone. Despite Alir's confusion, the group continues to make their way to the castle, and upon arrival, there isn't any guards or even Elusian forces to be found, which is worrying, and for a good reason too, because it seems that Alfred and Celine's mother were captured by a woman cosplaying as a dragon named Zephia, who eventually reveals to Alir that not only was she behind the attack that ended up killing Alir's mother, but also she reveals that it was Elusia that had released the Fell Dragon in the first place. And I don't know about you, but I never saw that coming. Now, Zephia has her lackey attempt to hold off Alir and co before she just fucks off entirely. Also, I'm not quite sure why she just decided to leave Queen Ev completely unhurt, even though Zephyia made it quite clear that she is willing to kill literally anyone and everyone who gets in her way. But that weirdly anticlimactic conclusion to this extremely dangerous situation aside, the Queen reveals to Alir that outside of Selene's ring that holds Emblem Celica, there is a secret second ring given to Firene that is in a ruin near the border of Brodia. And thankfully, Alfred is very familiar with these ruins, so he offers to show everyone the way there. And while we find Alir questioning why the scenery was beginning to change as they got closer to Brodia, because, well, nature, Alir notices a red-headed girl up further on the path, and with Alfred thinking that she is distressed for some reason, he decides to greet her and ask her what is wrong. And in one of possibly the most adorably weird greetings I've ever seen, Yunaka introduces herself, and within seconds of meeting her, she has become my undisputed favorite character of this game. Step aside, twins. Red-headed Lysithea is taking the spot both of you shared. Anyways, Yunaka apparently found the emblem ring that Alfred was taking us to, but she got it stolen off of her by a group of bandits who are now occupying a ghost town off in the distance. And surprisingly, Yunaka can just see everything that's going on because she has sniper scopes for eyes.
Yeah, I have a killer's eyes.
That aside, the group obviously just helps Yunaka get her ring back, which just happens to be holding Emblem Micaiah. And surprisingly, we managed to get 2 best girls in one single mission. Nothing can stop the momentum now, as far as I'm concerned. Once the bandits are defeated, Alir runs into Vale a second time, and with nothing happening in that interaction either, the gang finally continues to make their way to the Kingdom of Might. And when they get to the border, Alir is almost met with an arrow to the face, which is a strange greeting, might I add, but said arrow was shot by Alchrist, the younger of the 2 princes of Brodia, and alongside him are Lapis and Citrine, his retainers. At first, Alchrist kind of came off pretty intense, but it actually turns out that he's essentially a mix of Bernadetta and Marianne from 3 Houses, so he's got a lot of potential. But as far as the story is concerned, after some self-deprecation that Marianne would be so proud of, Alchrist decides to show the group to the capital. On the way there, once the group reaches an area called the Grand Crossing, we meet one of the 2 princesses of Elusia in battle. A girl that at least 80% of the Fire Emblem fanbase hates for literally no reason, Hortensia, who was ordered to take Alir's rings by her father. During the fight, we also meet Risotto, who's doing their absolute best to keep Goldmary from thirsting over Alir too heavily, and more importantly, it seems that Hortensia holds the emblem ring for Lucina. After defeating all of the Elusian forces, they make the extremely tactical decision of retreating instead of dying. Because, I don't know about you, but killing a 14-year-old girl is not something I think anyone wants to do. Vander then mentions that Lucina is one of the 5 rings that Queen Lumera had in her possession before they were all stolen. So I think it's safe to say that Elusia has all 5 of those stolen rings, so that's fun. Also, weirdly enough, he mentions that the ring that holds Lindis is permanently kept in the Elusian King's chambers, so 1, ew, and 2, poor Lynn. That creepy factoid aside, once the group finally arrives at the Brodian castle, Alchrist's older brother, Diamant, decides to greet Alir at the castle's gates. And while discussing the situation with Prince Diamant, their father, King Morian, decides to join the discussion. And I'm not gonna lie, just like Alir says to Alfred after this initial conversation, I was not expecting the King of Brodia to be such a goofball of a character. I mean, he literally is so lackadaisical that it actually caught me extremely off guard. Given his appearance and how everyone talks about him and, well, Brodia's, outward appearance in general. But as it turns out, apparently Diamant is the most serious member of this family. I mean, King Morian not only just gives up the emblem ring within a moment's notice to someone he just met, but he also just tosses it around like it's a toy, which is not what I was expecting at all, especially of a king. And once Alir summons Roy, a different Elusian princess attacks the castle. This one introduces herself as Ivy, and noticeably, she doesn't really seem to want to be doing any of this, or maybe I'm just reading into it too much. Anyways, she is accompanied by her retainers Zelkov and Kaketsu, and we learn during the battle with her that she also is in the possession of Emblem Leaf. When the battle has concluded, while Ivy flees, a Brodian soldier informs Diamant that the King of Elusia Elusia himself is at the border demanding to see King Morian. And even though it most definitely is a trap, King Morian decides to meet him in battle because honor and being a Chad or something, which is essentially the actual reason, by the way. I'm not even kidding. While accompanying the king to battle, he suddenly asks Elir and Diamant to stay in the rear guard and goes to fight the Elusian king on his own, which leads us to this cinematic that I really don't have much to say about other than it's just sick. I mean, Morian looks awesome up until the point where he gets shot through the heart by Lyn, and I have to say King Hyacinth actually looks menacing as hell. Now when Elir and Diamant try to run to King Morian's aid while the Elusian forces are kidnapping him for some type of ritual, Ivy once again stands in the way as her father forces her to literally sacrifice herself while they run. And despite her willingness to sacrifice herself, Elir thankfully refuses to kill her. And as a thank you of sorts for sparing her life, Ivy tells Elir and Diamant what King Hyacinth's plans are and where the ritual will be taking place. And then she just takes her leave. Being a guide probably would have been nice, but she probably doesn't want to be involved in her father's death, so I guess that's fair enough. Now, while the group is desperately trying to find their way through a blizzard, Elir, Alfred, and Diamant all see a girl who Elir immediately recognizes as Vale, which makes me personally feel a lot better because I was beginning to wonder if Vale was a character that was all in Elir's head or not, but after she points the group in the right direction, she yet again just disappears. And though Elir would like to follow after her, there are definitely more important things at hand as Diamant reminds them. And despite the blizzard getting worse, thankfully, Elir and co were actually able to find their way to the cathedral. Unfortunately though, it seems that the blizzard bought Hyacinth enough time to carry out the ritual that they were talking about, because as Diamant and Alchrist both notice their father near the altar, King Morian appears to have been turned into a corrupted. And despite Marth begging everyone to run, Alchrist and Diamant refuse to leave their father regardless of whether he is truly dead or not. And as Diamant and Elir both strike down King Morian, it was honestly a very bittersweet moment, and that honestly kind of hit me in the feels a bit. And Elir's conversation with Morian was pretty endearing as well, I do want to add. And I only wish that I could have seen what Alchrist would have had to say with his father, but given how Elir and Diamant are kind of busted in the whole attack department, didn't really have much of a chance to. Now, once Diamant finished striking down one king, he set his sights on striking down another. Just before he was able to avenge his father, Hyacinth was saved by the same individual who had killed Elir's mother. But even though she had saved King Hyacinth from an untimely death, once Sombron made his way up to the ritual site, Sombron then proceeds to kill Hyacinth in a very brutal manner that is kind of shocking. Like, this combined with Diamant calling Hyacinth a bastard earlier is all really just the last thing I would have expected from a Fire Emblem game recently, at least. I mean, I know how Sigurd dies. This franchise isn't exactly child-friendly or anything, but, you know, 3 Houses and 3 Hopes, I don't even think there was a single cuss word in any of those games, and most deaths weren't shown on screen. But regardless, I'm totally here for it. Now, after poor Hortensia watches her father get eaten alive, she attacks this mysteriously cloaked individual and inadvertently ends up revealing that the individual in question is actually Vale, which I don't know why, but that actually genuinely shocked me even more than the brutal death that we had just witnessed. I mean, the death itself wasn't that shocking, just us being shown it in its entirety was the shocking part. I just want to reiterate that. But this twist of Vale being Sombron's daughter was genuinely shocking. I did not expect this in a million years. I don't know how, but I just didn't. Another twist I didn't expect was the time crystal that we were given near the beginning of the game to be used against us. I honestly really enjoy the fact that this mechanic wasn't just shoehorned in because they wanted to keep the whole rewind shit from 3 Houses. But while Vale used the time crystal against Elir, she also manages to steal all 6 emblem rings from the group while Zephyr and the rest of the 4 Hounds all introduce themselves. Now, while we watch Elir lose their literal shit as Sombron corrupts all of the rings, I just want to express how much I love this chapter and the following chapter. I mean, by this point, you kind of go into every fight with so much confidence. I mean, for me personally, I finally found ring combos that I really enjoyed and couldn't wait to see how much more broken I could make some of these characters. So to have that kind of confidence just for this game to rip it all away and essentially put you back at square one. It's just such a fantastic choice to be like, yeah, you thought you were halfway done with this game? Yeah, nah. You just lose. It's fine. But seriously, it's amazing, like thematically, gameplay-wise, cinematically, all of it. Everything about this scene, everything about this chapter is just perfect. Also, it does help a lot that the voice actor for Alear does a very good job of selling this moment. And Vale's voice actor, by the way, dear God, her words are like knives throughout this entire fucking cutscene. She did such an amazing job. And speaking of amazing jobs, whoever came up with this idea needs a raise. But anyways, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's move on. While Alear is losing their mind, Vander and Alfred force them to retreat alongside the rest of the group. And while all of them are retreating, Vale, with the help of the 4 hounds, attempt to hunt down and kill everybody. And if not for Ivy, Kagetsu, and Zelkov, she probably would have succeeded. While Ivy comes to Alear's aid, she also offers up the rings that held the emblems Lucina and Lyn. And Zelkov also gave us back the time crystal because unfortunately that was the only thing he could manage to steal from Vale. Now, after giving Vale and the 4 horsemen the slip, Ivy began to show the group the way to the Queendom of Solm, until Alcris started to blame her for everything that was going on, which is totally fair because honestly she is part of the several things that led to his father's death. But Diamond thankfully talked Alcris down a little bit by reminding him that she is also the reason why they knew of the location of this ritual in the first place, which isn't that comforting in hindsight, but you know, he's got the spirit. It's fine. I'm just glad that Diamond at least realizes that King Morian's death was probably unavoidable, unlike his brother, which does suck. But with the drama squashed for the time being at least, onward to Solm they go. And as they finally get to Solm, the group immediately becomes lost because, well, sand. Like, I'm not even kidding, that's all this part of Solm is just sand. There's no nothing, just sand. Did I mention sand? And once they finally admit that they are lost, a savior conveniently comes to their aid. And that savior is a man named Fogado. And I'm sorry, Yunaka, but you just got dethroned for my favorite character intro. Honestly though, Zeno Robinson absolutely killed it as Fogado. This character introduction was amazing. I mean, Fogado's got it all, man.
Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you, but I took one look and thought to myself, self, they are lost.
And, who are you?
Who am I? I'm the guy, here to keep the peace in Tula Desert. Call me Fogado, yeah?
Dashing good looks, humor, personality, charisma, that insane outfit choice. He's like Claude, if Claude was twice as charming, and I didn't even think that was possible. But, I mean, he is less tactical than Claude, so I guess there has to be some sacrifices. Now, once Fogado has finally realized that he is in the presence of the Divine One, he immediately offers to show everyone the way to the Solm capital. But before that, he has to take care of some corrupted that his fellow sentinels Pandreo and Bune are holding off. And once they are all defeated, Fogado brings everyone to the Solm Palace as promised. Now, when everyone has finally arrived at this palace, we learn very quickly that the Sentinel Fogado is actually Prince Fogado. On top of that, after a brief conversation with the Queen, not only do I learn very quickly that this may actually be my favorite family in the game, but also, not only do they keep the ring that holds Ike in some random junk drawer, but after looking for it, the Queen remembers that her daughter took it with her when she left the palace. And Princess Tamara has been gone for days. Neither her nor Fogado bat a single eye at this information, by the way. God, do I love how ridiculous this game is. Funnily enough, it seems Fogado knows precisely where she, Marin, and Panette all are. As he leads everyone there, they arrive right as bandits are attempting to steal this ring from Tamara. And once all of the bandits are dealt with, Alear explains the whole situation with the Fell Dragon, and to everyone's surprise, Tamara then says that they were already well aware of the whole situation, and I mean everything that was going on. And when Alear and everyone else begin to question how this is possible, Tamara tells Alear that Solm has spies all across Helios, keeping an eye on all of the other kingdoms, and because of that, they learned about Elusia working with the Fell Dragon pretty early on. But unfortunately, they weren't able to do anything without Alear's assistance, so they just focused on defending their own country. And while Queen Sephoria stayed at the palace issuing orders to the guards, Fogado kept an eye on the Elusian border, just in case there ever was an individual who claimed to be the Divine Dragon, and this individual actually wasn't Alear. He would then lead them to a trap, essentially, and deal with them there. All the while, Tamara would wander the country keeping the ring safe, which, honestly, that plan's kind of fire. I mean, have the most important person in the country where they should be, have someone watch the border for people who, have nefarious purposes, and keep the most important item in the fucking country not where it's supposed to be. I mean, it's not exactly foolproof, but who would ever guess that the ring would not be behind the walls of Solm Palace? Especially when that's literally where everyone else on this world keeps all of their rings. I mean, we literally saw all of the kings and queens that we've met beforehand keep their ring on them, or in the castle. Now, after reveling in the plan details for a little bit, Tamara also offers to lead Alear to the location of Solm's second ring. But before she can say where it is, a guard interrupts her, telling Tamara that Ivy's sister has broken into Solm Palace. And once the group has arrived to said palace, it seems that Hortensia was actually alone. At least for the time being. Once Alear, Tamara, and Ivy talk her down from killing the queen, 3 of the 4 hounds, specifically Zephyr, Marnie, and Mavier, make an appearance with a battalion of Elusian soldiers. In that very moment, it is revealed that Hortensia stole the ring in her possession from Vale and was attempting to gather all 12 rings herself so she could revive her father, which is honestly so sad, and I feel really bad for her. I mean, she thinks her sister left her all alone, and she just wants things to go back to the way they were. Like, you can genuinely feel for this poor kid. But unfortunately for Hortensia, Zephyr doesn't really give a shit, and literally hypnotizes her or mind controls her in an attempt to make her kill her own sister, which thankfully fails. After the fight, Hortensia and Ivy have a cute little sister moment, and Ivy eventually talks Hortensia into joining the group, with Hortensia handing over the ring that holds Byleth. Queen Sephoria shows up to scold the sisters and then reminds Tamara that she was going to bring Alear to Solm's second ring. And while traveling to said ring, we see Vale switch from the evil fell princess everyone was running from in Elusia back to the Vale that we met all that time ago in Firene. And as Tamara, Alear, and co all finish saving a dancer named Sidal from the haunted fortress that also held Corrin's ring, Vale seems to have caught up with the group. Unfortunately for her, she gets verbally abused by Alear, Alfred, and Ivy before she eventually runs off in tears. I can't exactly blame them, but also can't help but feel bad for Vale. I mean, she's being manipulated by her father and Zephyr, as well as the rest of the 4 hounds, which are also the people that she considers family. It's just a really unfortunate situation. But as we go back to Alear and their compadres, they finally decided to make their way back to Firene to come up with a game plan, since now that all 12 rings are completely accounted for, 5 of them are in Alear's possession and the other 7 are held by the Fell Dragon's forces, and they have to figure out how to turn the tides. Speaking of tides, while they are strategizing, we see Rosado and Goldmary attempting to reunite with Hortensia shortly after they decide to steal the emblem ring containing Erica and Ephraim from Marnie and Mavier, which fortunately served as a bit of a distraction because the both of them were on their way to Firene with 7 ships tasked to kill as many people as possible when they finally arrived. Coincidentally, while Alear's crew are making their way to Firene, the group runs into Rosado and Goldmary as they are attempting to flee from the Elusian soldiers that had pursued them. And while they are beating the soldiers back, Angel Vale is currently being fed more lies by Zephyr. And during their conversation, Vale reveals that apparently they have an older sibling, which we'll talk about in a bit. After saving Rosado and Goldmary from a very untimely death at the hands of 2 of the hounds, they continued their way back to Firene. And while marching to the castle, Alfred and Alear notice some smoke coming from a town in the distance. And it just so happens to be the very same town that they rescued Celine at forever and a day ago. And it is now currently being burnt to the ground. While they are taking in the horrors of the scene before them, of people being murdered and houses being burnt, Vale and all of the 4 hounds approach Alear. Vale then makes a very desperate attempt to have a civil conversation with Alear, but understandably, considering the scene in front of them, Alear isn't having any of that shit. And while while Alir is going in on her for ordering Flora to be attacked and burnt to the ground, Vale then turns around to question why the hounds would even allow this to happen in the first place. And they all finally drop the facade of babying her. Zephyia tells her that she is the one who gave the orders in the first place. Zephyia also tells her about her evil alter ego, and even reveals that she herself is the source of Vale's evil alter ego. Now, while feeling the weight of all of the guilt for all of the things that she has unwillingly done, Vale once again gets brainwashed before she even has time to process this information. And the low blows don't stop there. While Alir is not only forced to battle against Marth, Vale even summons the corrupted version of King Hyacinth to torment Ivy and Hortensia during the battle. And unlike King Morian, who was essentially a zombified version of himself, which kind of made it easier in hindsight, Hyacinth looks no different than from the last time that we saw him. No chew marks, no missing limbs, no glowing veins. He looks perfectly fine, aside from the sickly gray skin. Oh wait, he had that before. So yeah, he's perfectly fine. During the combat, both Ivy and Hortensia's conversations with this corpse of Hyacinth were bittersweet, given, Ivy promised to surpass her father as Queen of Elusia, and Hortensia finally got the closure that she wanted as she had a chance to say goodbye to her father. And after defeating him, Ivy and Hortensia retrieve the ring containing Leaf. Meanwhile, Vale and the Four Hounds end up retreating. And once she is defeated, good Vale wakes up again and manages to throw Alir Sigurd's ring before Zephyia was able to smack the absolute shit out of her in retaliation. I mean, I'm serious. I'm pretty sure Queen Sephoria could hear that smack. And once they all return to Elusia, Zephyia informs Sombron of the situation with both the rings and Vale. Sombron in return gives Zephyia an enchanted helmet that apparently will boost the strength of her mind control BS. And after being handed the helmet, Zephyia then asks about the supposed sibling that Vale spoke of earlier. Sombron then confirms that he killed all of them himself, or at least he thinks he did, because shortly after slaying all of them, he was sealed. And Zephyia apparently never recovered the body of said child in question, so this is kind of starting to make me think that Alir might be this long-lost child. Am I the only one who's thinking that? Regardless, we jump back to Alir and the rest of the group as they are now on a boat making their way to Elusia. And along the way, they are attacked by two ships, one of which had an elder gentleman that both Ivy and Hortensia recognized. And once they are reunited with all of the enemies defeated, we see the emblems gather to talk about their ability to grant a miracle. In this discussion, they talk about whether they should use this miracle ability to bring back Queen Lumera, or if they should even use it at all, because apparently it comes at quote-unquote a great cost. So this literally is the Infinity Gauntlet from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Also, does no one find this concerning that these emblems don't actually need to be summoned? They can kind of just congregate on their own? Or did Alir just kind of put them all in a circle and walk away as like a tea party type thing that a kid would do? Honestly, that might be funnier, but it's still weird regardless of how this whole thing happened. Anyway, once the crew finally makes it to Elusia, they arrive in a port town that Ivy remembers as being extremely lively. And after some investigation, they realize that unfortunately everyone in the town had been slaughtered and turned into corrupted. Ivy and Alir then decide that it's probably best if they leave, at least until they are stopped by Mavier and Marnie, who, after a very intense battle, end up leaving behind the rings for both Roy and Micaiah. And oddly enough, Diamant and Alchrist are also reunited with Saphir that we met earlier in Brodia. Not really sure why she's here, but hey, I'll take it. Anyways, as Mavier and Marnie return to Elusia's castle to tell Zephyia about the rings that they lost, after some exposition, Zephyia actually ends up knocking out the both of them, which is kind of funny, and she turns around to tell Gris that he has a mission. And this mission is that while her, Sombron, Vale, and the unconscious hounds take their leave, Gris is tasked with seeing whether or not Alir is actually Sombron's long-lost child. And once Gris quite literally fucked around and found out, not only did Alir get Celica's ring back from Gris, but he was also able to confirm Zephyr's theory. And after revealing to Alir that they are the Fell Dragon's long-lost child, Gris also tells us that both Divine and Fell dragons can summon the rings, but the clear distinction between the two of them is that divine dragons pray to summon them, while on the flip side, fel dragons use invocations, which is exactly what Alear does to summon the emblem rings. And while Alear begins to mentally crumble at this revelation, the rest of the group decide to be productive and search the castle for Sombron, Vale, and the rest of the hounds, while Gris ends up fleeing. After not finding a single soul in the castle, everyone tries to comfort Alear, and once they regain some of their sanity, Alear decides to summon Sigurd and ask him if what Gris said was true or not. And unfortunately for Alear, Sigurd confirms it. And just as Alear feels like their entire life was a lie, Sigurd offers some encouraging words, making Alear recognize that though they are a fel dragon by blood, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be divine at the same time, which sounds weird and stupid now that I'm saying this out loud, but Sigurd explains that emblems used by fel dragons cannot speak, as we've seen with almost all of the rings at this point, but the ones that are used by divine dragons, like all of the emblems that we know and love, can. He then even explains that Alear's hair and eyes are proof of this concept, since not only has it gone from being completely red to half red and half blue, but he also explains that Alear uses both invocation and prayer, because the emblems keep their free will after Alear summons them, therefore proving that Alear inherited at least some of the divine dragon powers through Queen Lumera. And with these encouraging words and a small pep talk from everyone, Mavier suddenly decides to arrive just as they are about to leave the castle to figure out where everyone went. And after he intercepts everybody, he then warns Alear that Sombron and Vale are heading to the kingdom of Lythos, and he tells Alear that he will explain exactly what they're doing there on the way. And once they join up with a resentful Marnie and end up setting sail to Lythos, Mavier explains that Sombron is heading to Lythos so he can raise his homeland Gradlon from the ocean, seeing as it was lowered into the sea after his defeat 1,000 years ago. And on top of that, Sombron also is aiming to figure out a way to invade other worlds, and I'm assuming that means that Sombron wants to invade the worlds of the other emblems. And once Mavier finishes explaining Sombron's plans, he also does us the favor of giving us a little bit of backstory for Vale, which is quite sad if I'm being honest. I mean, she was too young to fight in the war with her siblings, and because of her being the child of a fel dragon, she had to live her entire life in hiding. And when her father finally woke up again, despite how happy she was treated terribly by her father. And though I'm paraphrasing it, it was a sad enough backstory that it actually even brought Marty to tears, who also had a pretty unfortunate childhood herself, though she claims it was pretty generic since kids get abandoned all the time, which is kind of funny because she's right. I mean, there is actively at least 3 orphans on this team, as she says her whole backstory, and I personally think it's just funny because we're at the point where some characters are just completely self-aware. Now, as the ship gets closer to Lythos, instead of seeing the lush and vibrant green landscape that we saw at the beginning of the game, the land looks like it's literally dying, and that is either due to Gradlon's return, or it's because Sombron's forces are destroying something that is called the Divine Dragon Shard. Regardless, once everyone finally arrived at the port and made their way to the castle, they confronted Zephyr, who unveiled a brand new look for Evil Vale. Originally, Marnie planned to return to the Hounds and fight us, before she ended up actually having a change of heart at the last second that unfortunately cost her her life. Because after she made an attempt to destroy the crown that lays on Vale's head, Zephyr proceeded to kill Marnie in retaliation, which of course enraged Mavier, and with the newly joined absolute unit of an individual, they all dive into probably one of the hardest fights of the game. I mean, I'm not really sure if that's actually a true statement, but all I know is that I steamrolled most fights. The only way that I could really win this fight was by throwing Yunaka with Corrin's emblem ring at Vale for her to not absolutely destroy my entire team. Also, just in case you haven't heard of this combo, Yunaka literally has a 0% chance to get hit by anything ever when she's using Corrin's ring. It's absolutely insane how they allowed this busted combo to exist. After the fight is over, Vale miraculously comes back to her senses. But before Alear could explain any of the situation to her, Sombron shows up and quite literally just kills Alear in a very dramatic sequence. And with Alear out of the way, Sombron steals back the 11 rings that he was missing, and with every single Infinity Stone in his possession, fashion, much like Thanos probably should have done with the snap, Sombron literally wishes for infinite power. I'm not even joking. And with said infinite power, Sombron grows like 10 times his size and ends up raising Gradlon from the sea. Then Sombron just takes his leave, which, I mean, that's fine, sure. And after that, Zephyr walks up to brainwash Vale yet another time. And after Vale threatens to kill the rest of the group, we, meaning Alear, transported to a World Tree Yggdrasil type dimension from Attack on Titan or something. And after Alear just contemplates their life, Vale then shows up, and Vale, despite claiming to be dead as well, wrestles back control of her own body in this kind of awkward sequence that was definitely supposed to be interpreted as intense. Everyone just kind of watches her argue with herself while stumbling around like a drunk idiot. And personally, when I was playing through this part of the game, I didn't have the audio on, so when I was watching all of this, it was just extremely awkward. Anyways, once Vale is finally freed from the brainwashing powers, Vale then resurrects Alear as one of her corrupted, which understandably freaked everyone out. But before anyone could really voice any of their concerns about what was going on with zombie Alear, they're attacked by actual corrupted. And surprisingly, Sombron just kind of tosses all of the rings on the floor after using their power to become king of the universe. And even though Alear was able to come back to life and summon the rings, unfortunately it seems that they were stripped of all of their divine dragon abilities because all of the emblems remained in their corrupted forms. At least until once all of the rings were retrieved and the corrupted were defeated, Alear's body began to reject Vale's power, and once they said goodbye for what was supposed to be the last time, they were resurrected again. This time by the rings, so it makes it all okay having two resurrections within one battle of another. I know I said at the beginning of this video that this game is absolutely hilarious, and I mostly meant it because of certain support convos and also certain characters like Amber, Fogado, Pandrio, and such just existing. But as semi-serious as I have been going through all of this game's story, we all do know that this story is not serious at all. At least I hope. But genuinely, I was not only caught off guard by this next bit, but when this came out of Marth's mouth, I genuinely started crying from laughter because of how funny this was to me. And I can't even really do it justice by, speaking it to you, so I'm just gonna show you.
Your life was saved by the combined power of 12 rings, making you the 13th emblem, the Fire Emblem.
Now that Alear is quite literally the Fire Emblem Engage of all time, all of the other emblems reveal that this was the miracle that they were talking about earlier. The ability to turn someone into the 13th emblem. Or maybe just reviving someone is the ability, and turning Alear into an emblem only happened because of the ring that Lumera gave them. I have no clue on which one it is, to be honest. It's never really clarified. I'm just assuming that it is the emblem thing though. After reuniting with everyone, they begin celebrating for some reason. Then there's a bit of an earthquake that then reminds them of the reality that they haven't really been paying much attention to because theatrics. With Gradlon newly risen from the ocean, it also seems to be powering a giant ass portal that just appeared out of nowhere from the sky that Sombron is eventually going to be using to attack the other worlds. And thankfully, for some reason, Vale knows exactly the location of all of the fell dragon crystals that are powering this very same portal. And once they reach the location of the first one out of the 3 fell dragon crystals, apparently this one specifically is being protected by Gris and Zephyr. And after a bit of back and forth, apparently Vale seems to really want to return the favor for all of the times that she was lied to and manipulated. And once the battle was all said and done, Vale meant what she said because both Gris and Zephyr were killed. But before Zephyr bit the dust, she told Vale and Alear that even though there are 2 more fell dragon crystals to destroy, one of them would be absolutely impossible to get to because it is at the bottom of a lake. And in one last attempt to redeem herself for some reason, Zephyr creates a magical object that could raise the terrain to make the destruction of this crystal possible. At least so she says. I'm not quite sure why she decided to give us this crystal out of nowhere. I mean, she is easily the most spiteful and cruel character in this game, but hey, I guess she felt bad. Or maybe the fan theory of Lumera and Zephyr being ex-lovers has some weight to it. Either way, after they get to the lake and use the magical device, it turns out that the magical device Zephyr gave us was actually a fucking time machine. And they only realize this once Alear runs into a red-headed version of themselves from 1,000 years ago. And of course, they end up battling one another, even though neither of them really want to, purely because Reno doesn't want to be pronounced a defect by Sombron, which, given that this Alear literally just watched a variety of awful ways that their siblings were killed, I'd be pretty desperate too. Going forward though, I'm pretty sure we're back in the current timeline, though there is actually literally no real indication that this is the case. But while everyone is discussing how weird it was to fight evil Alear, Vale spends her time searching for the final crystal, and what she senses, she doesn't really want to discuss with anyone, which again is understandable, because as the group arrives at Gradlon's castle, Vale insists on going ahead alone. But because she took way too long to convince anyone, the individual that is guarding the final crystal ends up coming out of the castle and greeting everyone themselves. And it turns out to be the one and only Queen Lumera. It turns out Sombron wanted to give one final screw you to their child by turning their mother into a corrupted. And Vale, the loving little sister that she is, wanted to save her sibling from the grim reality. And once the brief conversation with Lumera concludes, Lumera then decides to retreat back into the castle so she can prepare for the upcoming battle. Then Vale uses her 100 stealth that she got out of nowhere to go into the castle alone and seal the door behind her. And following an unsuccessful attempt to kill Lumera a second time, Lumera decides to return the favor just as Alear and co are finally breaking down the door, saving Vale from her ironic and cruel fate. And once a heart-wrenching battle between both mother and child concludes, we see a recreation of the iconic Mr. Stark I don't feel so good moment, as Alear and Queen Lumera have a very special final goodbye while she is literally turning into dust. Now, once everything is said and done, with the final crystal broken, everyone begins making plans for after the war because the job's done? I guess? The plan making is obviously cut short by the fact that Sombron and the portals still need to be dealt with. I'm not really sure how everyone forgot about that. I mean, why make plans when you could possibly die within the next few hours? But hey, who am I to judge? Fast forwarding to Alear bringing the Somniel to practically outer space, Marth warns Alear that if they win once the portal is closed, all of the emblems, aside from Alear, are going to cease to exist. And it actually seems like Marth was telling the truth. He wasn't being dramatic or anything, because when they finally reach Sombron, Sombron closes the portal behind them, which then causes all of the emblems to disappear, at least for the time being. And before I get to the Avengers Assemble moment, let's walk it back a bit. So, just in case you weren't aware, since Engage's release, there has been a bunch of fan theories that the DLC bracelets of this game were actually emblems from a different reality. And the brand new Wave 2 DLC emblems have actually confirmed this theory, with Hector and Camilla specifically directly telling certain characters that they quote-unquote aren't the same as the version of the character that they knew. And for some people this would kind of feel out of the blue, but Sombron himself actually even talks about emblems from different worlds, and even reveals to us that he himself is from a different reality altogether. And on top of it all, his quest for world domination times infinity is actually to find his own emblem ring that he refers to as Emblem Zero, which I find extremely interesting. Not only do I wish that I could figure out which character he was referring to as Emblem Zero, because I don't know about you, but there are literally thousands of Fire Emblem characters, and I can't exactly figure out which one he's referring to. So if you have your theories, let me know in the comments, because I would love to know who you think Emblem Zero could be. But I also think it's actually really cool that there's going to be a legitimate lore reason for the weird shit going on in the DLC, and this makes me even more excited for the story of Wave 4's Felzino log. But this video isn't supposed to be about DLC. I'm sorry. After Alear gives a speech about believing in himself or whatever Naruto Uzumaki type speech he ended up giving, he ends up summoning all 13 emblems to not only justify the creation of the unique animations for all of these emblems that are playing on your screen right now, but also to finally kick off the grand finale of the game. Now, the first phase of the fight is pretty straightforward. It's nothing too special, but once he is defeated for the first time, not only does he turn into his fell dragon form, but the reinforcements that he had tactfully summoned before Alear and co arrived have finally appeared. And with them, they have all what Sombron calls the Dark Emblems in their possession. These Dark Emblems honestly had so much potential, which is so upsetting. Now, Sombron promotes them as being evil entities from different dimensions, and Marth himself even says that they are basically the major villains of each of the Fire Emblem games, which is true. I mean, one of them is the Shadow Dragon from, well, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, or the remake, which is simply called Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. Another one of these Dark Emblems is the Dark Bishop, which I'm assuming is Veld from Tharsia 776, and another is the Mad King Ashnard from Path of Radiance. My point being, big villains from a lot of different Fire Emblem games. But where it falls short is they are all just one generic model that doesn't even look even remotely close to any of them, nor does it remotely share any features of any of the characters that they are representing, which just really sucks, especially considering each emblem has their own special interaction if they fight the specific villain from their original game. But since you can't really see what these villains are supposed to look like, there isn't really much weight to any of the interactions, at least to me. And it's kind of weird, given that all of the emblems recognize their counterparts immediately, despite them all looking the same. But I do understand there are probably developmental reasons for why the actual models aren't there. I know I'm asking a lot for something that we not only are going to only see once at the very end of the game, but also something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Anywho, after a very fun battle and dealing the final blow to Sombron, Sombron actually ends up reuniting with his long-lost emblem, the only thing/person that he ever truly cared about. But unfortunately for him, this reunion takes place in the afterlife. I hope it was all worth it, dude. Now, after saying goodbye to all of the emblems, that is that. The game is over. Well, almost. Obviously, there's the character endings, and outside of Alear being with whoever you decided to ship them with, there aren't any other paired endings, which is kind of lame in my opinion. But before I get into a rabbit hole of talking about how sad I am that my ships can't actually be anything more than headcanon, there's a pretty interesting post-credit scene that I want to talk about. So, just before Alear's coronation for them to become the new ruler in the place of late Queen Lumera, Alear is found at the Ring Vault in their home trying to summon Marth for just one last time, which of course is unsuccessful given the explanation that Marth gave us earlier, or at least that's what Alear and everyone is led to believe, because just after they are whisked away by Vale, Alfred, Ivy, Diamant, and Tamara, all of the emblems are reactivated, which I'm not quite sure what this means if I'm going to be honest. I mean, there's obviously the whole Fire Emblem 2 getting re-engaged theory that I could possibly spout, but I personally think this has more to do with the now confirmed Wave 4 of the DLC, which as I said earlier is the Fell Xenologue, which is going to be a new story focusing on what could possibly be an alternate reality Elios. And I'm thinking that there is probably going to be something that happens that causes Alear to be transported to that world, and it's probably going to be because of these now reactivated rings. I mean, if there is a story reason for the emblem bracelets, then there has to be a story reason for reality jumping, right? I mean, I'm sure I'm overthinking it, but the only way that we'll ever know is when the Fell Xenologue DLC drops. But if you do have some theories of what this could possibly mean, make sure you put it in the comments. I can't wait to see what theories you guys have. Now, with that, the entirety of the game is finally covered. So, let's do the whole spoiler-filled review, just in case you decided to skip the entire video, which is fine. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, this game isn't extremely convoluted. There isn't very much about this game that isn't black and white, and I personally don't think this game is even trying to be all that deep or anything. This game is honestly just what I can really only explain as what I would call a lot of things that people overly criticize for literally no reason. It's just dumb fun. It's that simple. I don't really think that there's some huge huge message behind this game besides maybe don't judge a book by its cover, and it doesn't really matter what anyone's past actions are, they can grow and change from it. Obviously, those two things are if I'm searching for a message. But I do think, given how so many dynamics of several characters kind of scream those two things that I just mentioned, it isn't necessarily me reaching for a message. As I said, I don't think this game is trying to be anything other than a shonen anime game. I mean, I know I poked fun at it several times, but the game is cringy in certain points, I think we can all agree. But just like with most anime, you kinda have to just embrace the weirdness and quirkiness of this game. And despite this game not being nearly as deep as Three Houses or Three Hopes, I still love this game just as much. I mean, it gave us some extremely unique characters, some of the weirdest ones to exist in the franchise if I'm being honest, and even some characters that hilariously subverted expectations. Plus, it even gave me some of my favorite characters in the entire franchise. I do want to say, I get it if you aren't exactly a fan of this game. I mean, if Three Houses or Three Hopes was your introduction to the franchise, it definitely is a totally different experience. But I don't necessarily think that that means that this is a bad game, as I've said several times now. I mean, I think this game is an amazing breath of fresh air from two extremely heavy games with a lot of dark and complex themes. And I don't know about you, but I don't want super heavy video games 24/7. I mean, sure, I could go play a completely different series if I'm looking for tonal shifts, but look at Zelda, or Pokemon, or even Final Fantasy. And yes, I am picking the #1 children's game on the planet, but some Pokemon games are pretty intense with their themes. Regardless, those franchises have some great games that are Three Houses-esque in terms of being super deep with heavy themes, and some are like Engage, just some dumb fun games to breathe some fresh air into the franchise. I mean, I'm not saying it's a new direction or anything, by any means. I mean, 99% of the staff that worked on Engage didn't even touch Three Houses. So it's not a directional shift, it's just a breather game, if that makes sense. Now, I know I'm rambling, but genuinely, this game was great. Not my favorite, but it's not bad by any means. Especially when you take the game as serious as it takes itself, which, to be clear, it doesn't take itself seriously at all. Outside of that though, this is going to be kinda hypocritical given how I've said that this game isn't supposed to be anything crazy or even anything to be taken serious, but I do want to say I'm not really a big fan of how Sombron was built up to be this super intense villain, because if I'm being honest, Zephyr and even Vale were like a million times better villains than Sombron. I mean, Zephyr was extremely cruel, manipulative, killed random people just for fun, but all she ever really wanted was a family to love, which is a weird contrast to what I just said. And I like that she always had it but just didn't see it. And I mean, she had substance. Sombron didn't. And Vale really toyed with our emotions. I mean, you had the angel that was regular Vale, flipped on her head into some brutal, horrible person who just wanted to watch Alir suffer for her own enjoyment. And Sombron, on the flip side, was kinda nothing villain. I mean, yes, he was cruel and an asshole for desecrating Queen Lumera's corpse, but he didn't do it for the sake of being cruel or a horrible person. I mean, he said it himself. He didn't care. He literally tells us he won't remember Alir or anyone else on Elios if he ever ended up returning from his incursions. So outside of just being the worst father in existence, the dude was kinda just a big crybaby. I mean, you want to destroy countless worlds because of a ring you lost when you were a kid? Seriously? It was just super weird and, in my opinion, one of the dumbest motivations I've ever heard of. But literally, outside of that, I don't really got anything else to criticize. Anyways, let me know what you think of Engage as a whole. Did you enjoy it as much as I did, or did you not like it very much for whatever reason? Regardless, let me know how you feel in the comments, and I just want to thank you so much for watching. Whether you stuck through the whole thing or jumped to the very end just to see my full review. Now, like in my other Fire Emblem videos, this is the part of my video where I highlight some of my favorite characters. And unfortunately, unlike in the Three Hopes videos and the future Three Houses videos that I will slowly be churning out, I had multiple videos to cover the entire huge cast of those games. As much as I would love to just word vomit about like 80% of the cast, I'm just going to focus on 5 big characters that really stuck out for me. And while I'm doing that, let me know who your favorite characters are as well. Okay, so I lied. Before we get to the top 5, I want to talk about some honorable mentions. The first of which is going to be Pandreo. Now, honestly, I gotta say, for a character I never really used outside of his introduction battle, I'm surprised that I have him on this list at all. But just because he is the only character on this list that isn't one of my favorites doesn't mean that he isn't one of the most unique and one of the most fun characters in Engage. I just wanted to talk about him a little bit because I gotta say, not only are both him and his sister's stories so fascinating, but Pandreo is just so fun to watch. Like, in combat, the dude just barks whenever you're using him. And outside of combat, I mean, he's the priest character, and he loves to party. He managed to teach Vander how to twerk before Vander's back gave out on him, and the dude has not only coerced almost everyone into barking/howling in their support chains, but he also managed to make howling into the official way to pray in the Church of the Divine Dragon. Like, that is canon. He's an absolute legend. Next up, let's talk about the twins. Now, I gotta say, I very rarely see characters that I love the designs of in trailers for video games or anime or shows or anything really, and after getting to know them, I actually end up liking them as much as I do with both Fram and Clan. I mean, they are both just so adorable and wholesome and just the funniest kids for literally no reason. I mean, their supports with each other are hilarious, and their obsession with Alir kind of just reminds me of pretty much anyone whenever they get a hyperfixation on something. What I'm trying to say is they just both need to be protected at all costs. And now let's get into our top 5. Now, sitting at number 5, let's talk about a king who strives to lead by example, which is Diamant. Honestly, unlike with the others, I don't really have too much to say about Diamant. I mean, he's stoic, an amazing character, and he deeply cares about those around him and is brave enough to personally make major changes to his country for the better, regardless of what the people around him think. Sound familiar? Coming in at number 4 is Ivy. Now, everyone and their mother has been simping for Ivy since the reveal of this game, and I can gladly say I'm one of those because honestly, outside of Dorothea and Hilda from Three Houses, she is like one of the best female characters to exist in the Fire Emblem franchise. I mean, she's advertised as a femme fatale, and she's a character that just radiates an energy that will have anyone with eyes throwing themselves at her, but when you actually get to know her, God, is she the biggest dork and absolute failure of an individual on Elios. I'm saying that in the most loving way possible before you decide to destroy me in the comments. I mean, she is a huge dork. Literally, as most people call her, she's the fail girl boss or fail wife of Engage. She gets scared of her own shadow, she's terrified of ghosts, which the emblems basically are, by the way, and she's afraid of just the darkness in general. And she's the queen of Elios. You know, the country that is the poster child of being evil and dark and shit. Yeah, the crown princess of that country has the mental fortitude of a toddler without a nightlight. Not to mention, she's the source of one of my favorite clips of this game.
Can we start with why you seem to have such anger toward me?
I love you.
Huh?
So if all of that doesn't make you adore her, I honestly don't know what will. She's one of the funniest and dorkiest characters in the game, and it's obvious why she's in my top 5. So, speaking of funniest characters, let's move on to number 3. Fogato is, of course, kinda just Claude, but again. But in my opinion, he's Claude with 1, no filter, which is saying something, and 2, how I personally think Claude probably would have been if he didn't end up being Almiran royalty. I mean, he's carefree, fun-loving, funny as hell, and not to mention, he rivals both Marin and Goldmary as being the biggest flirt of the game. But unlike the latter of the two, he does it pretty successfully. Also, what no one else really ever gets to see about Fogato is just how serious he is despite this whole persona that he puts on. Under all of what is going on his outward appearance, he's pretty serious and works extremely hard, but he feels that for his people to be as fun-loving and carefree as he wants them to be, he has to lead them by example, which I think is a very interesting method, but hey, it works. Coming in at number 2, which won't really come as a surprise if you are a fan of this character, but otherwise it probably will. Selene is an extremely underrated character. Not only does she kind of fade into obscurity like the other royal siblings after a while, but I think because she is one of the very first characters we get introduced to, she kind of just gets lost in the chaos after a while. But honestly, she's such an amazing character. Not only is she one of the most kind and caring characters in Engage, but it also is extremely impressive that she is kind and caring in spite of her situation. Just in case you didn't play the game or didn't really interact with Alfred all that much, you would know her older brother has a very rare disease that if you don't pair up Alir with him at the very end of the game, this disease unfortunately ends up claiming his life shortly after he becomes king. And unfortunately for Selene, she spends her entire life just anticipating this moment. Given that Alfred is one of the most kind-hearted characters in the game, it is very easy to imagine Selene just growing jaded and becoming bitter at the fact that her brother is destined to die at a very young age despite not deserving it whatsoever. But thankfully for her, she never does, and honestly, just from that alone, she won me over. I could just keep going on and on about her, but that's honestly the biggest reason why she's number 2. That kind of mental stability is just beyond impressive. Now, let's talk about the character sitting at number 1. So, numero uno shouldn't really come as much as a surprise to you as it probably would for others, but it's Yunaka. I mean, oddly enough, now that I'm thinking about it, she is one of the most popular characters in this game, which is really weird for me, by the way, because I kind of end up liking some of the more obscure characters in Fire Emblem games. But I also did allude to this a bunch in her introduction chapter, so maybe it's not a surprise. It doesn't matter. Now, not only is she one of the most dynamic characters in the game, with simultaneously being the peppiest and also most intense character if you listen to her crit voice lines, but she has an extremely endearing and kind of sad backstory. I mean, being an orphan that is forced to become an assassin, and then the person who trained her to be an assassin has her kill him, and in return he lets her just exist as whatever she decides to be, is such a whirlwind of a story in itself. But on top of that, she also wants to start a foundation to ensure that other kids in Brodian never have to go through what she did. Not only is this kind of unexpected, but it's also so heartwarming. Plus, she's got the wackiest catchphrases and reactions out of any character in the game. I mean, if you don't like her, I genuinely just don't trust you. But with that being said, that is the end of my character highlights. And with that out of the way, again, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, especially if you were interested in seeing my review of Fel Xenologue whenever it comes out. And in the meantime, I'll be working on my retrospective reviews of all of the Three Houses routes, so keep an eye out for those as well. And with all of that being said, hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.